is Mark Gunn Media.
Hit it!
Hello and welcome once again to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. I'm Mark Gunn. The views expressed are those of the speaker and not reflective of anyone else. Today's episode, 6 Degrees of Separation with Prince. Usually when I do these podcasts, they're fully scripted, fully fleshed out ideas. I know exactly where I'm going and how I want to get there. But today, one day removed from the announcement of Prince Rogers Nelson's demise, I've got to admit that writing anything would be disingenuous. And with all of the tributes that are going on right now, people speaking about their experiences with Prince, it only seems fair and it only seems right to do exactly what he did, and that was to speak from the heart. You know, when you think about it, everybody remembers where they were the first time they heard a Prince song. For me, it was 1978. I was a teenager, and the album was his debut, For You, and the song was Soft and Wet. I'm thinking, you know what, this is pretty cool. This is pretty cool, and it wasn't like anything else that was on the radio at the time. And one of the blessings that I've had in my life, well, actually there's been a couple. One being a second-generation musician, thanks to my dad, and having been blessed in my radio career to meet and learn from some of the biggest names in the music business. So even in those early years, I had a strong sense of musicality, and I knew what I liked when I heard it. And I knew I liked Prince's For You. Not the album in its entirety, but there were flashes of brilliance on it. And the thing that impressed me most about Prince as a musician was that he did all of the work himself. 27 different instruments that he played on this album, all at 19 years of age. Very, very impressive. So, 1 year later, 1979, I'm graduating from high school, and his second album comes out. And in the early days of Prince recordings, it's like you got to peel layers with each subsequent album. You learn more and more about who this guy was as a musician and as an artist, as a producer. And the more that, I was getting into the musical thing, the more I was learning about production and getting my radio career started, Prince was one of those guys that you looked at as an example. This was a guy who did things his way, and I was really impressed by that. I think For You, like I said, as a debut album, wasn't bad, but the second album, the self-entitled album, for me, was a watershed moment because he was speaking to me musically in a way that very few other musicians did, because back then, music was somewhat segregated. You had pop, you had rock, you had country and all that, and R&B and all that. But he managed to come up with an amalgamation of many different genres. And, I've been basically a rock kid all of my life, despite the musical disciplines that I've learned over the years. And this album spoke to me. And once again, the production for a 21-year-old at the time was unreal. Here's a guy who played all his own instruments, did all of his own arrangements, and worked very quickly. If I remember right, that second album took about 6 weeks to record. Nowadays, if you get something done in 6 weeks, it's a miracle. So this was the album that kind of got him a lot of attention. You had the singles, Why You Want to Treat Me So Bad, and I Feel For You, and songs that did well on the pop charts and did even better on the R&B charts. So, like I said, as the albums came out, you learn more and more about who this guy was as an artist and as a producer. There was Dirty Mind. That was kind of a punk rock funk R&B kind of deal, kind of in the vein of Rick James, only Rick James a lot better, if that makes any sense. Controversy was another watershed album for a lot of people. Because I think this is when you were seeing Prince start to really come into his own as an artist. He'd been around a couple of years, and people were getting into his music, and he was becoming more accessible to more audiences. Great album, great production, and he was starting to incorporate other musicians. Now, the album I think that really, really got him in the mainstream, or at least started to, was 1999. And this is when you really start to see the complexities of who Prince is as a producer and as an artist. You know, he did things his way, and you're going to hear me say that quite a bit because from, you know, the stories that people tell that have been in his orbit, he was very exacting in the way that he did things, the way he recorded things, the way that he wanted things, and he was a taskmaster. And people like that I really admire, especially when it comes to being in the studio. Now, I don't want this to be a discography review of all of Prince's music because, you know, people are going to be listening to it for a while and they're already starting to buy it up, and each album has its own merit. But what I want to talk about is those things that are very seldom talked about and a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that I was able to learn about through associates, people that worked with Prince, and friends of his. This is that whole 6 degrees of separation thing. Like I said, that other blessing in my career was being able to be around quite a few people that were great talents in their own right, that had the chance to either work with Prince or learn from Prince or had some sort of association with him. And the one thing that you'll hear from a lot of these people is it's very consistent. A was A, B was B, and C was C with Prince, especially when it came to his music. What I respected most about him is that he was an artist's artist in that he wanted control over every aspect of his career, whether it be the production, the publishing, royalties, the whole 9 yards. This was what Prince was all about. Now, you remember when he had his first dispute with Warner Brothers, and he didn't like the way things were going down with the publishing and with his recording contract. So you remember when he had the word slave on the side of his face? That was his protest against the record company, against Warner Brothers. And he would carry that on for a while. See, he would make great music and make political statements. They only barely intersected each other through either visual or oral means. And I loved that about him. It's like, okay, I'm going to keep rocking out, but I still have a beef with you. And you saw that whenever you saw that word slave on his face. I'm going to be jumping around here because it's kind of hard to keep things in chronological order because there's just so much about this guy, so much about this man, this legend in the music business that we'll never see the likes of again. Purple Rain was a watershed moment in my life because my love of that album, my love of that movie was because of a very special young lady that was in my life at the time, who shall remain nameless, but let's just say that she was a bigger Prince fan than I was. And we must have seen Purple Rain, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, and it never got old. Got into the whole purple evolution of Prince with a lot of his offshoot artists, Sheila E., Brown Mark, some of the other artists that were coming up at that time. He had ventured into that whole movie star thing, and it was cool. And again, it was him doing things his way, telling his story. Wendy and Lisa. And if I start popping off these names off of, just rather randomly, these are people that I'm thinking about that were in that orbit, some of which I had the chance to meet and talk with. It's so funny when you think about it. For me, all of these people, brilliant musicians in their own right, that I've had the chance to talk to or spend time with, but unfortunately, I've never had the chance to talk with Prince. Managers, producers, engineers, concert promoters that worked with him, but I've never had the chance to sit down and talk with the man himself, and I regret that because I'm sure there's a whole lot I could have learned from him, as a lot of people did. My boys in Mint Condition, my man Senator John Hoffman out of Minnesota, who was a big Prince fan, who happened to be in his orbit for a while. Chaka Khan, all of these people that have done work with him that will tell you the same story about him, about his graciousness as an artist, his graciousness as a producer. The Louisville connection that he has. And I just found out about this recently, that he was here a few years ago and heard that our library was about to close down. And it was the library that primarily served Louisville's black community. It was about to close down, and Prince wrote a check that was large enough to cover the expenses and keep that library open. Nobody ever knew about that until recently. You gotta love somebody like that. I think getting back to Prince as a record company businessman, the protection of the music at all costs, and the beef that he had with his publishing company, Warner Chappell at the time, this is when he went and changed his name to that symbol. You remember the symbol, right? And he became the artist formerly known as Prince. On the surface, people were thinking, okay, he's just doing something that's him, that's unusual, that's eccentric, it's a marketing thing. But he was making a statement. And his statement was he wasn't happy with his publishing deal. So rather than have his name associated with anything that Warner Chappell was doing at the time, he changed his name to that symbol. So according to him, it gave him a lot more freedom to do what he needed to do. And I think it was 4 or 5 years later, when his contract ran out, he was able to reclaim his name again. But he kept the symbol. That thing has become ubiquitous when it comes to Prince. You see that symbol, you know it's Prince. That's the kind of thing that I would tend to hope that younger musicians would learn from, is taking total control over your career, every aspect of it, from recording your music to writing it to publishing it, protecting yourself. And that's exactly what he did. One of the other stories that I heard was about his propensity for recording in the studio. If you've listened to a lot of the news reports, they're talking about these thousands of songs that he's got in his vault. Some of them have been finished, some of them have not been. And some of the speculation as to who's going to have control of that music now. Well, I don't really know, and I don't think it's for any of us to speculate. And on the one hand, while I think it's kind of sad that we may not ever hear any new music from Prince, on the other hand, there's a side of me that's kind of saying, you know what? I'm okay with that. Because of the body of work that he's contributed for over 30 years, anything that comes out now that he didn't have his hand in personally, to me would just be a perversion of who he was as an artist. Let the pundits and let the reporters squabble about who's going to control the music and what kind of posthumous releases will come out. I would just rather enjoy what was and keep those memories and listen to the music with a deeper love and a deeper respect. And as a producer and a musician myself, I'll more than likely go back on some of these albums and listen to them a little differently. Try to pick apart what it was that made Prince who he was as a producer and learn a little something. So this one kind of hits hard. I remember there's been maybe 2 or 3 other musicians that I considered heroes that passed on that had a heavy emotional toll on me. Michael Jackson was one of them, and for those of you that know the name Terry Kath, you know who he is. That was another one as well. Like I said, this whole thing is rambling somewhat. To all of those that I've had the chance to talk with about Prince, get some of those stories and get some of the experiences. And those are stories you're going to start hearing more and more about his prowess as a basketball player. At 5'2" is one of the best basketball players that people have ever seen. Again, his prowess in the studio and his attitude when it comes to the way he records his music, his charitable work, his faith, of course. You're going to be hearing a whole lot about that. But these are stories that have been told by those that knew him and by those that I've been fortunate enough to meet. Those are things that I'm going to keep with me. And I remember one gift that I did get from Prince years ago, and it was something that I think maybe 200 or 300 radio programmers got at the time. There was a compilation of videos that Warner Brothers had put together with Prince's permission. And I think it was leading up to the Graffiti Bridge project, but there were all these great videos on this one reel that was distributed to quite a few of us as program directors and music directors. And I'm going to dig that out. I'm going to watch those videos just because. So as a lot of people buy more of Prince's music, they share their music or they share their memories, and you're going to be seeing this for quite a while. You saw the response from all over the world. I'm just going to go in my little corner of the world, vibe to my Prince music, and reach out to those folks that were around him that I've forged friendships with, and we'll share our stories as well. But for now, I saw something on Facebook that talked about the Trinity, the Holy Trinity of music now, with Prince, Michael, and Whitney. Prince was hard to take. This passing was a little hard to take. I would also like to think that just as he did everything else, he kind of went out on his own terms. I would like to think that. In fact, I'm going to think that. Once again, you've been listening to Gunshots, Straight from the Hip. The views expressed are those of the speaker and not reflective of anyone else. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to send me an email to markgunmedia@gmail.com or leave your comments in the space provided below. Thank you for listening. Mark Gun Media. No hype, no hoopla, just damn good work.